The wagon wheels had stopped turning in front of Zelda Langford's farmhouse last summer, and when they started again, they carried away her husband and her sister both, heading east toward a new life that did not include her. She stood in the doorway of the modest ranch house outside La Junta, Colorado, watching dust settle on the empty road long after they disappeared, her hands gripping the wooden frame so hard splinters bit into her palms, thinking that 26 years of living had led to this moment of absolute stillness. The August heat pressed down on the prairie like a heavy blanket, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed mournfully, as if they too understood that everything had changed. Zelda had married Thomas Brennan when she was 19, a rushed affair because her father was dying and wanted to see her settled. Thomas had been adequate, never cruel, but never particularly warm either. A man who viewed marriage as a practical arrangement rather than a love match. Her younger sister Margaret had come to stay with them that spring, fleeing a bad situation in Kansas City where she had been working in a dress shop for a woman who drank too much and paid too little. Zelda had welcomed her with open arms, grateful for the company on the isolated ranch, never suspecting that she was inviting catastrophe into her home. The signs had been there, she supposed, looking back with the clarity that only hindsight provides. The way Thomas suddenly cared about washing before dinner, how Margaret always seemed to be in the barn when Thomas was there, helping with chores she had never shown interest in before. The whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when Zelda entered a room. But she had been blind, or perhaps just unwilling to see, until the morning she returned early from town to find them in the kitchen, locked in an embrace that left no room for innocent interpretation. Thomas had not even had the decency to look ashamed. He simply said that he and Margaret had fallen in love, that these things happened and that he would be leaving. Margaret cried, apologizing through tears that seemed genuine, but Zelda had stood frozen, unable to process the dual betrayal. Her husband and her sister, the two people she had trusted most in the world after her parents passed. Within a week, they were gone, and Zelda was alone on the ranch with 300 acres of semi-arid land, 60 head of cattle, 2 horses, and a mortgage payment due every 6 months to the bank in town. That had been 14 months ago, in the summer of 1883. Now, in October of 1884, Zelda had managed to keep the ranch running through sheer stubbornness and backbreaking work. She had learned to rope and brand cattle, to fix fences, to shoot straight enough to scare off coyotes and the occasional wolf. Her hands, once soft and delicate, were now calloused and scarred. Her face, which had been pale from spending most of her time indoors, was now tanned and weathered. She had cut her long blonde hair to shoulder length because she did not have time to maintain it properly. She was not the same woman Thomas had left behind, and she was grimly proud of that fact. But the loneliness was crushing. The ranch was 7 miles from La Junta, a small town that had sprung up along the Arkansas River where the Santa Fe Trail crossed. She went to town once a week for supplies and church on Sundays when she could spare the time, but she kept to herself, unable to bear the pitying looks from the townspeople who knew her story. In a community of barely 800 souls, everyone knew everything, and Zelda's humiliation was public knowledge. It was on one of these supply runs, on a crisp October morning, when the cottonwoods along the river were turning gold, that she first saw the cowboy. She was loading sacks of feed into her wagon outside Henderson's General Store when her roan mare suddenly shied, nearly upending the whole load. Zelda grabbed for the horse's bridle, but the animal was spooked by something, rolling her eyes and backing up dangerously. "Easy there, girl." A man's voice, low and calm, came from behind her. Zelda turned to see a tall cowboy approaching slowly, one hand extended toward the horse. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-streaked brown hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of creek water, that shifting green-brown that changed with the light. He wore dusty work clothes and well-worn boots, and he moved with the easy confidence of a man completely comfortable in his own skin. The horse calmed under his touch, her ears swiveling forward attentively. The cowboy stroked her neck gently, murmuring words too soft for Zelda to hear, and within moments the mare was perfectly settled. Thank you, Zelda said stiffly, not quite meeting his eyes. She was not accustomed to accepting help from strange men, or any men at all anymore. No trouble, madam. She got spooked by a dog, I think. Saw it run under the boardwalk there. He gestured vaguely toward the storefront, then tipped his hat politely. I am Parker Donovan, just hired on at the Rocking M Ranch as trail boss. The Rocking M was the largest ranch in the county, owned by Marcus Whitfield, who ran several thousand head of cattle and employed a dozen permanent hands. It was located about 12 miles west of Zelda's property, far enough that they were not exactly neighbors, but close enough that their ranges almost touched. Zelda Langford, she replied, because good manners required it, even though she wanted nothing more than to finish loading her supplies and leave. She did not miss the way his eyebrows raised slightly at her name, so he had already heard about her. Wonderful. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Langford. There was something in his tone, a gentleness that made her throat tighten unexpectedly. She was not used to kindness anymore. It is Miss Langford now, she said flatly, because she had filed for divorce through a lawyer in Pueblo, and the decree had come through last month. Colorado had relatively progressive divorce laws, and abandonment was clear grounds. She was no longer Mrs. Thomas Brennan, thank God. Good day to you, Mr. Donovan. She turned back to her loading, making it clear the conversation was over, but she could feel his eyes on her for a moment longer before he walked away. She told herself she did not care what he thought, that she did not care what anyone thought, but her hands trembled slightly as she hefted the last feed sack into the wagon. 3 weeks later, on a cold November morning, when frost painted the prairie grass white, Zelda discovered 6 of her cattle dead in the south pasture. They had been shot, not by rustlers trying to steal them, but by someone who simply wanted to kill them and cost her money. It was the kind of petty, cruel act that made her stomach churn with anger and fear. She could not afford to lose livestock. The bank payment was due in January, and she had been counting every head, calculating whether she would have enough to make it through the winter and still pay what she owed. She rode back to the house, cleaned her rifle, and loaded it with shaking hands. If someone was targeting her specifically, trying to drive her off her land, she needed to be ready to defend herself. She spent that night sitting in the darkened kitchen with the rifle across her lap, watching the windows, jumping at every sound. By dawn, she was exhausted and furious and very close to tears, though she would not allow herself that weakness. She rode into town that morning to report the incident to Sheriff Bradley, a portly man in his 50s who listened to her story with a sympathetic expression but offered little hope of catching the culprit. Could be anyone, Miss Langford. Drifters, maybe. Or someone with a grudge. You have any enemies? The question was almost laughable. Her enemies were her own sister and her ex-husband, but they were somewhere in Missouri by last report, starting a new life. They had no reason to come back and harass her, unless this was their way of trying to force her to sell the property so they could claim their share. But no, that made no sense. Thomas had signed the ranch over to her entirely as part of the divorce settlement, probably out of guilt. No enemies that I know of, Sheriff, but someone killed my cattle deliberately. They were all shot in the head. Sheriff Bradley sighed and promised to ask around, but Zelda left his office with no confidence that anything would be done. She was on her own, as usual. She stopped at the general store to buy more ammunition, and as she was leaving, nearly collided with Parker Donovan on the boardwalk. Miss Langford. He steadied her with a hand on her elbow, then immediately released her. You look troubled. Everything all right? There was no reason to tell him. He was a stranger, someone she had spoken to exactly once, but something in his open, honest face made the words spill out before she could stop them. Someone killed 6 of my cattle, shot them and left them to rot. The sheriff says there is nothing he can do. Parker's expression darkened. That is low. Killing livestock for no reason is about the worst thing a man can do out here. He paused, studying her face. You out at your place alone? Yes. She lifted her chin defensively. And I can handle myself. I am not some helpless woman who needs protecting. Did not say you were, he replied mildly. But even the toughest man in the territory would be smart to have help when someone is targeting his stock. You mind if I ride out to your place and take a look around? Maybe I can see something you missed. She should refuse. She did not need his help or his pity. But the truth was she was scared and she was out of her depth, and pride would not pay the bank if she lost more cattle. I suppose that would be acceptable, but I cannot pay you for your time. Did not ask for payment. He gestured to his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding tied at the rail. I will follow you out if that is all right. The ride back to the ranch was mostly silent. Zelda was acutely aware of Parker riding behind her, and she found herself sitting straighter in the saddle, conscious of his eyes on her. It had been a long time since she cared what any man thought of her appearance, and the fact that she cared now irritated her. When they reached her property, Parker surveyed it with an experienced eye. The ranch house was modest, but well maintained, built of wood with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The barn needed some repairs, and the fencing could use work, but overall, it was clear she had been doing her best to keep everything functional. You have been managing this place alone since last summer? Yes, why do you ask? Because that is impressive, Miss Langford. Most people would have given up and sold out by now. She did not know how to respond to that, so she simply led him to the south pasture where the dead cattle still lay. She had not had the strength to drag them away for burning yet, and the sight of them made her stomach turn. Parker dismounted and walked among the carcasses, examining them carefully. He crouched beside one, studying the ground, then stood and walked in a slow circle, his eyes on the earth. Two riders, he said finally, both on shod horses, so not Indians. They came from the east, stopped here, shot your cattle, and rode off toward the south. Deliberate, like you said. They took their time. He looked up at her, and his expression was grim. You really have no idea who would do this? None. She felt helpless admitting it. I keep to myself. I do not cause trouble. I just want to work my land and be left alone. Parker was quiet for a long moment. Then he said carefully, I heard about what happened with your husband. Whole county has heard, I imagine. Small places being what they are. Zelda felt her cheeks flush hot with humiliation. I see. And now you feel sorry for me. That is why you are here, playing the gallant cowboy for the pathetic abandoned woman. That is not what I think at all. His voice was sharp, cutting through her anger. I think you got dealt a raw hand, and you are playing it better than most would. I think your husband was a fool, and I think whoever is targeting you now is a coward, and I think you deserve better than all of it. She stared at him, struck silent by the vehemence in his tone. He held her gaze steadily, no pity in his eyes, only a kind of fierce respect that made something inside her chest crack open just slightly. I will help you burn these carcasses, he said after a moment, and I will talk to some of the hands at the Rocking M, see if anyone has seen or heard anything suspicious. Sometimes cowboys gossip worse than church ladies, and if someone is bragging about harassing you, word will get around. Why would you do that? She hated how her voice shook slightly. Because it is the right thing to do, and because I like you. He said it simply, as if it were a fact as plain as the sky being blue. You have got backbone, Miss Langford. That counts for a lot in my book. They spent the rest of the day burning the cattle carcasses, hard and unpleasant work that left them both covered in soot and reeking of smoke. Parker worked without complaint, and despite herself, Zelda found she appreciated his steady, calm presence. He did not try to take over or tell her what to do, but simply worked alongside her as an equal. When they finally finished, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold over the prairie. I should head back, Parker said, wiping his face with a bandana. But I will come back in a few days to check on you if that is all right. You do not have to do that. I know, but I want to. He mounted his horse, then looked down at her with a slight smile. You know, I have been working ranches since I was 14 years old. Been from Texas to Montana and plenty of places in between. Met all kinds of people. And I can tell you right now that your husband was an idiot. Before she could respond, he touched his hat brim and rode off into the gathering twilight. Zelda stood in her yard watching him go, feeling more unsettled than she had in months. She did not know what to make of Parker Donovan, with his easy kindness and straightforward manner. She had spent the last year building walls around herself, keeping everyone at a distance, and he had just walked through those defenses as if they did not exist. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She kept thinking about what he had said. He lost the better woman. Was that what Parker meant when he called Thomas a fool? The thought made her chest feel tight and strange. No one had called her better in a very long time. Most days she felt used up and discarded, like something broken beyond repair. Parker returned 3 days later as promised, riding up to her house in the late afternoon. Zelda was in the barn mucking out stalls, dirty work that never seemed to end, and she was not particularly presentable when he appeared in the doorway. Miss Langford, just wanted to check in, see if you had any more trouble. Nothing new. She leaned on her pitchfork, pushing a strand of hair out of her face. But I appreciate you checking. I asked around like I said I would. Nobody has heard anything specific, but a couple of the boys mentioned seeing some strangers passing through a few weeks back. 2 men on horseback, looked rough. Could be them, could be coincidence. Hard to say. I see. Well, thank you for trying. He shifted his weight, looking oddly uncertain for the first time since she had met him. I was wondering if you might need any help around here. Not trying to intrude or anything, but I have got Sundays off, and I am not much for sitting idle. Could help you with some of those fence repairs I noticed. Maybe patch up your barn roof before winter really sets in. Zelda wanted to refuse. Accepting help felt like admitting weakness, like acknowledging that she could not manage alone. But the truth was, she could not manage alone, not entirely. There were jobs that required 2 people, repairs she had been putting off because she simply did not have the time or the strength to do everything. And there was something about Parker that made her feel safe, which was a luxury she had not experienced in a long time. I still cannot pay you, she said carefully, still not asking for payment. But if you wanted to feed me lunch, I would not say no. I am getting tired of the cookhouse grub at the Rocking M. Despite herself, Zelda smiled. It felt strange on her face, like using a muscle that had atrophied from disuse. I suppose I could manage that, if you are sure you want to spend your day off doing more work. I am sure. He grinned at her, a quick flash of warmth that made her stomach do an unexpected flip. Besides, your place is a lot more peaceful than the bunkhouse. Those cowboys snore like freight trains. And so it began. Every Sunday, Parker rode over to Zelda's ranch and spent the day working on whatever needed attention. He repaired fences, fixed the barn roof, replaced rotted boards on the porch, helped her move cattle to fresh pasture. They worked mostly in comfortable silence, but sometimes they talked, sharing stories about their lives in the careful way of people learning to trust each other. Zelda learned that Parker was from a small town in Wyoming, the youngest of 6 children. His father had been a rancher who lost everything in a bad winter when Parker was 12. After that, Parker had worked various ranch jobs to help support the family, learning every aspect of cattle ranching from the ground up. He was good at his work and had a reputation as a fair and skilled trail boss, which was why Marcus Whitfield had hired him away from a ranch in New Mexico with the promise of better pay and a possible future partnership interest. Parker learned that Zelda had grown up in La Junta, the daughter of a farmer who had come to Colorado hoping to make his fortune and had instead spent 20 years scratching out a modest living from difficult land. She had been educated at the local schoolhouse through 8th grade, and she loved reading, though she had little time for it now. She had wanted children, but Thomas had always said they should wait until the ranch was more established, and now she was grateful they had never had any. At least no children had been hurt by his betrayal. As the weeks passed and autumn deepened into early winter, Zelda found herself looking forward to Sundays with an anticipation that both pleased and frightened her. She began to care about her appearance again, washing her hair on Saturday nights and wearing her better dress on Sundays. She cooked special meals, experimenting with recipes from her mother's old cookbook. And she caught herself smiling more, laughing at Parker's jokes and stories. Parker, for his part, seemed content with their arrangement. He never pushed for more than she was willing to give, never made her feel pressured or uncomfortable. He treated her with respect and genuine affection, and slowly Zelda began to believe that maybe she could trust again. Maybe not all men were like Thomas. Maybe some men actually meant what they said and valued what they had. It was in mid-December, on a cold Sunday afternoon, when fresh snow covered the ground, that everything shifted. They had been working together to bring the cattle closer to the barn for the winter, and Zelda's horse had stumbled in a hidden gully, throwing her hard into the snow. She was not seriously hurt, just bruised and winded, but Parker was off his horse in an instant, kneeling beside her with panic in his eyes. "Zelda, are you hurt? Can you move?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and she found she liked the sound of it in his voice. "I am fine," she managed, struggling to sit up. "Just had the wind knocked out of me." He helped her to her feet, his hands gentle but firm, and did not let go even when she was standing steady. They stood in the snow, his hands on her arms, looking at each other, and Zelda felt something shift irrevocably between them. The air seemed to hum with possibility. "Zelda," he said again, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something, and I hope it does not scare you off, but I cannot keep quiet about it anymore. I care about you. A lot. More than I probably should, given that I have only known you a few months. But I think about you all the time. I look forward to Sundays like a kid looks forward to Christmas. And I think you are the strongest, bravest, most beautiful woman I have ever met." Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Parker, I do not know if I am ready for this. After what happened with Thomas, I am not sure I can trust anyone again. I know, and I am not asking you to trust me right away. I know that has to be earned. But I want to try if you will let me. I want to court you properly, do this right, and I promise you, Zelda, I will never hurt you the way he did. I would rather cut off my own arm than betray you like that." She looked up into his sincere, open face, at the hope and vulnerability in his eyes, and felt her careful defenses crumble. Maybe she was a fool. Maybe she was setting herself up for more heartbreak. But standing there in the snow, with Parker's warm hands on her arms and his honest words hanging in the cold air, she decided that she wanted to be brave enough to try. "All right," she whispered. "All right, we can try." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He pulled her into a gentle embrace, and Zelda let herself lean against his solid warmth, feeling safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. They courted through the winter, a slow and tender unfolding of affection and trust. Parker came every Sunday as before, but now he also rode over on Wednesday evenings after work, bringing her small gifts. A book he thought she might enjoy, peppermints from the general store, a pair of warm gloves he had bought in town. Nothing expensive or ostentatious, just thoughtful tokens that showed he was thinking of her. They talked for hours, sharing their dreams and fears and memories. Parker told her about the time he had helped drive a herd from Texas to Kansas, 4 months on the trail with nothing but cattle and sky, and the occasional river crossing where they nearly lost half the herd. Zelda told him about her mother, who had died when she was 15, and how much she still missed her, especially during the betrayal with Thomas and Margaret. If her mother had been alive, maybe things would have been different. He kissed her for the first time on Christmas Eve. She had invited him for dinner, a special meal she had spent all day preparing, and afterward they sat by the fire drinking coffee and talking quietly. At some point, the conversation had lulled into comfortable silence, and Zelda looked up to find Parker watching her with an expression so tender it made her breath catch. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and he leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, the kiss sweet and careful, nothing demanding or presumptuous about it. When he pulled back, Zelda felt tears prickling at her eyes, though she could not say exactly why. "Are you all right?" Parker asked, concern creasing his brow. "Yes, I am more than all right. I just forgot that it could be like this, that someone could be so kind." He cupped her face in his hand, his calloused thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "He was a fool, Zelda. He lost the better woman, and I am grateful for it, because it means I got a chance to find you." Those words, spoken with such conviction, healed something broken inside her. She had spent over a year feeling like she was the one at fault, like she had been insufficient somehow, not pretty enough or interesting enough to keep her husband's attention. But Parker looked at her like she was precious, like she was exactly enough just as she was. The winter passed in a blur of quiet happiness. Parker continued to help around the ranch, and Zelda's property began to show the benefits of having two people working it. The fences were all repaired, the barn was weatherproof, the cattle were healthy and well tended. She still worked hard every day, but it no longer felt like drowning. It felt manageable, even satisfying. In February, Parker asked her to marry him. They were in her kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, washing dishes together after lunch, when he suddenly set down the plate he was drying and turned to her. "Zelda, I love you. I know it has only been a few months, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I want to spend the rest of my days with you, building a life together, working this ranch, maybe having some children if you want them. I know you have been hurt, and I know you are probably scared to risk it again, but I promise I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice. Will you marry me?" She looked at him, this good, honest man who had appeared in her life when she needed him most, and realized that she loved him too. Somewhere between the cattle drives and fence repairs, the Sunday dinners and Wednesday evening visits, she had fallen completely and irrevocably in love. It was different from what she had felt for Thomas, which had been more obligation than passion. This felt real and solid and right. "Yes," she said, and then she laughed because the word felt so inadequate for the joy flooding through her. "Yes, Parker, I will marry you." He picked her up and spun her around the kitchen, both of them laughing like children, and then he kissed her with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Parker rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right. Give you a real wedding in the church with the whole town there. Show everyone that you are loved and valued and cherished. I want them all to see you as I see you." Zelda felt tears on her cheeks again, but this time they were tears of happiness. "I would like that. But Parker, I do not have much money for a fancy dress or a big celebration." "Do not worry about that. I have been saving my pay for years. Never had much reason to spend it, but now I do." He grinned at her. "Besides, I already talked to Marcus about buying into the Rocking M as a partner. He has been wanting to semi-retire, and he is willing to sell me a share of the ranch and the cattle. With what I have saved and what I can borrow, I can make it work. Then once we are married, we can combine your spread with mine, make one larger ranch. We will be equals in it, Zelda. Full partners." She was stunned. She had not known he was planning any of this, had not realized he was thinking so far ahead. "You talked to Mr. Whitfield about buying into the ranch?" "Last month, after I decided I was going to ask you to marry me. I wanted to be able to offer you security, a real future. I know you have been through hell, and I wanted to make sure you knew I was serious about building a life with you." Zelda threw her arms around his neck and kissed him hard, pouring all her gratitude and love and hope into it. Parker responded with matching fervor, his arms tight around her waist, and for several long minutes They simply held each other, sealing their promise. They were married in April of 1885, on a bright spring morning when the prairie was carpeted with wildflowers. Zelda wore a new dress of pale blue silk that Parker had insisted on buying for her, and she carried a bouquet of wild columbines and Indian paintbrush. The little church in La Junta was packed with townspeople, most of whom had known Zelda all her life. There were whispers, of course. Some people thought she was rushing into another marriage too quickly. Others were happy to see her finding joy again after such public humiliation. But Zelda did not care what anyone thought. All she cared about was Parker, standing at the altar in his best suit, his eyes shining with love as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Reverend Thompson, who had known Zelda since she was a child, spoke about second chances and the redemptive power of love. Parker's voice was strong and clear when he said his vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish her for all their days. When it was Zelda's turn, she found she could barely speak through her tears, but she managed to say the words that bound her to this good man for the rest of her life. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Parker kissed her with such enthusiasm that several people in the congregation laughed and applauded. Zelda blushed but could not stop smiling. She was happy, truly happy, for the first time since before Thomas had destroyed her world. The reception was held in the church hall, with food provided by various townswomen who had taken pity on Zelda and wanted to help celebrate her new beginning. There was roasted beef and potatoes, fresh bread, pies, and cakes in abundance. A fiddler played music, and people danced and laughed and celebrated late into the afternoon. Marcus Whitfield was there with his wife, officially welcoming Parker as his new business partner and toasting to the success of their combined ranching operation. As the party was winding down, an unexpected guest arrived. Sheriff Bradley appeared in the doorway of the church hall, his expression serious. Zelda felt her stomach drop, fearing bad news, but the sheriff simply walked over to where she and Parker were standing and tipped his hat. Miss Langford, or rather Mrs. Donovan now. Congratulations! I wanted to let you know that we caught the men who killed your cattle last fall. Turned out to be exactly what I suspected, just some drifters passing through. They got arrested in Pueblo for rustling, and they confessed to shooting livestock on several ranches along their route, including yours. They are going to prison, so you do not have to worry about them anymore. Relief flooded through Zelda. She had not realized how much that unresolved threat had been weighing on her, even as she moved forward with her life. Thank you for letting me know, Sheriff. Of course, and I have to say, you made a good choice here. He nodded at Parker. Donovan is known to be a solid man. You deserve happiness after what you went through. After the sheriff left, Parker pulled Zelda close, kissing the top of her head. See? Everything is working out. The bad guys are caught, you are stuck with me forever, and we have a ranch to run together. I would say that is a pretty good day. The best day, Zelda agreed, leaning into his warmth. They spent their wedding night at Zelda's house, which would soon be their house. Parker carried her over the threshold, despite her laughing protests that it was not necessary, and then they were alone together for the first time as husband and wife. They came together with a tenderness and passion that surprised Zelda. Thomas had been perfunctory in bed, treating intimacy as another chore to be completed. But Parker touched her like she was precious, like giving her pleasure was as important as his own, and Zelda discovered that marriage could be something entirely different than what she had known before. Afterward, lying tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Parker traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder and said quietly, "Thank you for trusting me. I know it was not easy after what you went through, but I promise I will never give you cause to regret it." "I know," Zelda whispered back. "I believe you." And she did, completely and without reservation. The next few years were the happiest of Zelda's life. She and Parker combined their ranches as planned, creating a substantial operation that ran almost 500 head of cattle between her original land and Parker's stake in the Rocking M. They worked side by side every day, up before dawn to tend the animals, working until sunset on the endless tasks that ranch life required. It was hard work, but it was satisfying in a way Zelda had never experienced before. She was not alone anymore, struggling against impossible odds. She had a true partner, someone who valued her opinions and respected her skills. In the spring of 1886, Zelda discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling tired and queasy for weeks before she finally admitted to herself what it might mean. When she told Parker, he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests that he should be careful, then set her down gently and kissed her with tears streaming down his face. A baby, he kept saying, his voice full of wonder. We are going to have a baby. Their son was born in January of 1887 during a fierce winter storm that kept Parker pacing the house like a caged animal while the midwife from town attended to Zelda. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Zelda feared she might not survive it. But finally, as dawn was breaking, her son entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his arrival to anyone within hearing distance. Parker was at her side instantly, staring down at the red-faced, squalling infant with an expression of absolute awe. He is perfect. Zelda, he is perfect. They named him Peter, after Parker's father, who had passed away the previous year. Little Peter was a healthy, strong baby who seemed determined to make his presence known at all hours of the day and night. Those first few months were exhausting, but Zelda had never been happier. She would stand in the doorway of the nursery they had prepared, watching Parker hold their son with such gentleness and love, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she now had. Marcus Whitfield passed away peacefully in his sleep in the summer of 1887, leaving his share of the Rocking M to Parker as they had arranged. Parker was now the sole owner of one of the largest ranches in the county, and with Zelda's original property combined, they were among the most successful ranchers in southeastern Colorado. They hired 3 permanent hands to help with the work, and Parker proved to be a fair and respected boss. Men wanted to work for him because he treated them well and paid decent wages. In 1889, Zelda gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Penelope, but called Penny. She was a tiny, delicate baby who looked exactly like Zelda, with blonde hair and blue eyes. Peter, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything, though his help was more often a hindrance. Still, watching her children grow and seeing Parker with them, patient and loving and completely devoted, filled Zelda with a contentment she had never imagined possible. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to cold and wolves. There were dry summers when the grass turned brown, and they worried about having enough water for the herd. There were accidents and illnesses and the constant worry that came with raising children and running a large ranch. But through it all, Zelda and Parker faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each challenge they overcame. In the spring of 1891, when Zelda was hanging laundry in the yard and watching Peter and Penny play near the porch, a wagon appeared on the road leading to their house. As it drew closer, Zelda felt her stomach clench with sudden dread. She recognized the woman driving the wagon, even though she had not seen her in nearly 8 years. Margaret, her sister. Margaret pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down slowly. She was thinner than Zelda remembered, her face drawn and tired, with lines around her mouth and eyes that had not been there before. She stood beside the wagon for a long moment, just looking at Zelda, and then she said quietly, "Hello, Zelda." "What are you doing here, Margaret?" Zelda's voice came out harder than she intended, but she could not help it. The betrayal was still there, buried but not forgotten, and seeing her sister brought it all rushing back. "I came to apologize. I know it is years too late, and I know you probably do not want to hear it, but I had to try." Margaret's voice shook. "Thomas died 6 months ago. Cholera. We were living in St. Louis, barely scraping by. He was never able to hold a job for long, and the money ran out fast. I have spent the last 7 years regretting what we did to you, Zelda. What I did to you. You were my sister, and you loved me, and I betrayed you in the worst possible way." Zelda stood frozen, trying to process this information. Thomas was dead. Her first husband, the man who had destroyed her life, was gone. She waited for some feeling of satisfaction or vindication, but all she felt was a distant sadness for the waste of it all. I do not know what you want me to say, Margaret. I do not want you to say anything. I just wanted you to know that I am sorry, truly deeply sorry. I have been living with the guilt of what we did, and I know nothing can fix it. But I needed you to hear me say it. Tears were streaming down Margaret's face now. You did not deserve what we did to you. You were good to me, and I repaid you with the worst kind of betrayal. And Thomas, he realized it too near the end. He told me before he died that he made the worst mistake of his life when he left you, that he had lost the better woman. There it was again. The better woman, the words Parker had said to her all those years ago, words that had helped her believe in herself again. And now her sister was saying that Thomas had said the same thing before he died. Zelda did not know whether to laugh or cry. The door of the house opened, and Parker stepped out onto the porch, alerted by the sound of voices. He assessed the situation quickly, his eyes moving from Zelda to Margaret and back again. Everything all right out here? Zelda looked at her husband, this good man who had put her back together piece by piece, who had loved her when she thought she was unlovable, who had given her a life beyond anything she had dared to hope for. Then she looked at her sister, broken and guilty and seeking absolution. It is all right, she said finally. Margaret, this is my husband, Parker Donovan. Parker, this is my sister Margaret. If Parker was surprised that Zelda was introducing the woman who had run off with her first husband, he did not show it. He simply nodded politely. Madam. Zelda turned back to Margaret. I accept your apology. I forgive you, Margaret, not because what you did was forgivable, but because I refuse to carry anger and bitterness around for the rest of my life. I have a good life now, a wonderful husband and beautiful children. I am happy, truly happy, and I will not let the past poison that. Margaret sobbed openly now. Thank you. Thank you, Zelda. I do not deserve your forgiveness, but thank you. What will you do now? Zelda found herself asking. Despite everything, Margaret was still her sister, and she could not help the small spark of concern. I have a little money from selling what we had in St. Louis. I am going to Kansas City, try to start fresh there, maybe find work as a seamstress. I do not know, but I needed to come here first to say what I needed to say. They talked for a few more minutes, awkward and painful, dancing around the enormous hurt that lay between them. Before Margaret left, she looked at the house, the barn, the pastures dotted with cattle, the children playing on the porch, and said softly, You have a beautiful life here, Zelda. I am glad you found happiness after what we did to you. Truly glad. Then she climbed back into her wagon and drove away, heading east toward whatever future she could salvage from the wreckage of her choices. Zelda watched her go, and when the wagon disappeared from sight, she let out a long breath she had not realized she was holding. Parker came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Are you all right? I am. Actually, I am better than all right. She turned in his arms to face him. Seeing her again, hearing her apology, it made me realize how far I have come. 7 years ago, I was broken and humiliated and so angry at the world. Now I have you and the children and this ranch and a life I love. Thomas and Margaret, they are just shadows from the past. They cannot hurt me anymore. He really was a fool, Parker said, echoing his words from years ago. Biggest fool who ever lived, to give you up. But I am grateful for his foolishness, because it led you to me. We led each other, Zelda corrected, standing on tiptoe to kiss him. I think we were meant to find each other, Parker. I think all the pain and heartbreak was just the path to get here. They stood there in the yard for a long time, holding each other, while their children played, and the cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The past was behind them, forgiven if not forgotten, and the future stretched out ahead, full of promise and possibility. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the milestones of their growing family. In 1893, Zelda gave birth to another son, whom they named Paul. He was a quiet, thoughtful child, completely different from his boisterous older brother and dainty sister. The three children grew up strong and healthy, learning to ride and rope and work cattle as soon as they were old enough. Peter, the eldest, showed a particular aptitude for ranching and made it clear he intended to take over the operation someday. Penny was more interested in books and learning, and Zelda encouraged her daughter's education, wanting her to have opportunities that had not been available to women of Zelda's generation. Young Paul was still too little to show his preferences, but he seemed happy following his siblings around and trying to do everything they did. The ranch continued to prosper. Parker's reputation as a fair boss and skilled rancher spread, and other ranchers often sought his advice on cattle breeds and grazing management. Zelda handled much of the business side of the operation, keeping meticulous records and managing their finances. Together, they made decisions about when to sell cattle, how many breeding cows to keep, and what improvements to make to the property. They were true partners in every sense of the word, and their marriage remained strong and loving even as the initial passion of newlyweds matured into something deeper and more enduring. In 1895, La Junta experienced a severe drought. The Arkansas River ran low, and the prairie grass withered to brown stubble. Many smaller ranchers sold off their herds at a loss, unable to feed them through the dry spell. But Parker and Zelda had been preparing for such an eventuality. They had invested in drilling a deeper well and had been careful about not overgrazing their land. They supplemented their cattle's feed with hay they had stockpiled from previous good years. It was expensive and they had to tighten their belts, but they made it through without losing significant numbers of livestock. Some of their neighbors were not so fortunate. The Hendersons, who owned a small ranch adjacent to theirs, were on the verge of losing everything to the bank. Parker and Zelda discussed it and decided to buy the Henderson place, allowing the elderly couple to stay on in a small cottage and work as paid hands for as long as they wished. It was an act of generosity that cemented their reputation as good people who took care of their own. By 1897, the drought had broken and good years returned. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Peter was 14 now, tall and capable, doing the work of a full-grown man. Penny was 10, already reading at a level far beyond her years, and talking about becoming a teacher. Paul was 6, a sunny-natured child who brought joy wherever he went. One evening in the summer of 1897, after the children were in bed and the ranch was quiet, Zelda and Parker sat on their porch, watching the stars come out. They did this most evenings when weather permitted, treasuring these moments of peace after the long workdays. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Parker asked suddenly. "When your horse spooked outside the general store and I helped you calm her?" "Of course I remember. I was so suspicious of you, so determined not to need anyone's help." "You were the saddest woman I had ever seen," Parker said softly, "but also the bravest. Standing there all alone, trying to manage that ranch by yourself, refusing to give up even though everything had gone wrong. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, I think." Zelda felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, Parker could still make her emotional with his sweet, honest words. "I was so broken, Parker. I did not think I could ever trust anyone again. And then you came along and just patiently waited for me to heal, never pushing, never demanding more than I could give. You saved me." "We saved each other," he corrected, pulling her close. "I was just drifting before I met you, going from one ranch job to another, never putting down roots. You gave me a reason to stay, to build something lasting. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. Everything good in my life came from meeting you that day." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Zelda said, "I got a letter from Margaret last week. Did I tell you?" "No. How is she?" "She's doing well, actually. She remarried a few years ago, a widower with 2 young children. They have a dry goods store in Kansas City. She says she's happy, or at least content. She asked if she could come visit sometime, meet you and the children properly. What do you think about that? Zelda considered the question carefully. I think enough time has passed. I do not carry anger toward her anymore, just a kind of sad resignation about how things went. And she is still my sister, the only family I have left besides you and the children. Maybe it is time to truly put the past behind us. Then invite her to come, Parker said simply. If you are ready for that, I support it. Margaret did visit the following spring, bringing her new husband and stepchildren. It was awkward at first, the weight of history hanging between the sisters, but the children helped ease the tension. Peter, Penny, and Paul were curious about their aunt, and Margaret's stepchildren were fascinated by the ranch. By the end of the week-long visit, something resembling a normal family relationship had been established. Margaret and Zelda would never be as close as they once were. Too much had happened for that, but they found a way to move forward that honored both the past and the present. Before Margaret left, she pulled Zelda aside and said quietly, "You built something wonderful here. I can see how happy you are, how loved. I wish I could take back what I did, but since I cannot, I am just grateful that you found your way to this life. You deserve all of it, Zelda. Every bit of happiness." "I hope you have found happiness too," Zelda replied, and she meant it. She no longer wished ill on anyone, not even those who had hurt her. Life was too short and too precious to waste on bitterness. The turn of the century brought changes to the West. The frontier was closing, railroads crisscrossed the land, and small towns like La Junta were growing into larger communities. The wild, lawless days were fading into memory, replaced by a more settled, civilized society. But for Zelda and Parker, life continued much as it always had, marked by the eternal rhythms of ranching, spring calving, summer grazing, fall roundup, winter feeding. It was hard work, but it was good work, and they were satisfied with what they had built together. In 1901, Peter turned 18 and announced his intention to marry Sarah Miller, the daughter of another local rancher. Parker and Zelda gave their blessing, pleased that their son had chosen a sensible, hard-working young woman who understood ranch life. The wedding was held at the same church where Zelda and Parker had married 16 years earlier, and seeing her son so happy and confident brought tears to Zelda's eyes. Peter and Sarah built a small house on the far corner of the ranch property, and Peter gradually took on more of the day-to-day management of the operation, allowing Parker to take a slightly less active role as he approached 50. Penny left for Denver in 1903 to attend the state normal school, training to become a teacher as she had always wanted. It was hard for Zelda to let her daughter go, but she was proud beyond measure. Not many women had the opportunity for higher education, and Zelda was determined that her daughter would have every chance to make something of herself. Paul, now 12, showed an interest in the business side of ranching, often poring over the ledgers with Zelda and asking questions about prices and markets. He talked about maybe going to university someday to study agriculture and business, and Zelda encouraged him. The world was changing, and ranchers who understood modern business practices would be the ones who succeeded in the new century. In the summer of 1905, La Junta held a big celebration for the 20th anniversary of the town's incorporation. There was a parade and a fair and speeches by various local dignitaries. Parker was asked to speak about the history of ranching in the area, and he gave a well-received talk about the old days and how much things had changed. Afterward, at the community dance, Zelda and Parker took the floor for the first waltz, and people applauded and cheered. "They are cheering for us," Zelda said, laughing as Parker spun her around. "They are cheering for you," he corrected. The woman who refused to give up, who turned heartbreak into triumph. "You are an inspiration, Zelda Donovan." "We are an inspiration," she said firmly. "Everything I have accomplished, we accomplished together." Later that evening, sitting at a table with friends and neighbors, someone asked Zelda if she had any advice for young people just starting out. She thought about it for a moment, then said, "Do not let the hard times define you. I went through something that could have destroyed me, and there were days when I wanted to give up. But I kept going, one day at a time, and eventually I found my way through to something better. Life will knock you down sometimes, but you have to get back up. You have to keep believing that good things are possible. Parker squeezed her hand under the table, and she smiled at him. They both knew she was talking about more than just general philosophy. She was talking about their story, the unlikely, beautiful way they had found each other in the aftermath of betrayal and built a life that exceeded all her dreams. The years continued their steady march. Peter and Sarah had 3 children, making Zelda and Parker grandparents. Penny returned from Denver with her teaching certificate and took a position at the local schoolhouse, where she quickly became one of the most beloved teachers in town. She married in 1908 a quiet, bookish lawyer from Pueblo, and they settled in La Junta so Penny could continue teaching. Paul went to the Colorado Agricultural College in Fort Collins and came back 4 years later with a degree and modern ideas about cattle breeding and ranch management that proved very profitable. By 1910, Zelda and Parker were in their early 50s, still active but beginning to slow down a bit. They let their children and the hired hands do more of the heavy work, while they focused on oversight and planning. They had become the elder statesmen of the local ranching community, people others came to for advice and guidance. One evening, sitting on their porch as they had done countless times over the years, Parker said thoughtfully, "Do you ever think about how different your life would have been if Thomas had not left you?" Zelda considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I think I would have been fine in a practical sense. The ranch would have survived. I would have had an acceptable life. But I would never have known real happiness. I would never have known what it felt like to be truly loved, to be someone's partner in every sense of the word. I would never have had our children, and I cannot imagine a life without them. So as much as what he did hurt at the time, I am grateful for it now. His betrayal led me to you, and that makes everything worth it." "I feel the same way," Parker admitted. "Every hard thing I went through, every disappointment and failure was leading me to you, to this life we built together. I would not change a single thing, because it all brought me here." They sat quietly, hands clasped, watching the sun set over their land. The ranch that had once been Zelda's burden was now their shared legacy, something they would pass on to their children and grandchildren. The heartbreak that had defined her had been transformed into something beautiful and enduring. In 1915, on their 30th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party. Friends and family came from all over the county to celebrate with them. There were toasts and speeches, stories, and laughter. At one point, Peter stood up and said, "I want to thank my parents for showing me what a good marriage looks like. My father always says that my mother is the strongest woman he has ever known, and he is right. But I think they are both strong because they chose to be strong together. That is what marriage is supposed to be." Zelda cried, "Of course." She seemed to cry at everything these days, getting more sentimental as she aged. But they were good tears, tears of joy and gratitude, and overwhelming love for the family she and Parker had created together. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Zelda and Parker found themselves alone again on their porch, the same porch where they had spent so many evenings over the past 3 decades. 30 years, Zelda marveled. "It seems like yesterday and also like forever." "Best 30 years of my life," Parker said, pulling her close. "And I look forward to 30 more." "We will be in our 80s, Zelda laughed. "You think we will still be sitting on this porch then?" "I know we will. You and me watching the sunset, talking about our day. That is how I want to spend the rest of my life, Zelda. Right here with you." She kissed him then, a long, sweet kiss that held all the love and commitment of 3 decades together. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "He really did lose the better woman," Zelda said softly. "I am better now than I ever was before. Stronger, happier, more myself. And it is all because of you, Parker. You saw the best in me when I could not see it myself." "We brought out the best in each other," Parker corrected gently. "That is what love does. It makes you better than you could be alone. They sat on the porch until long after dark, talking and reminiscing and dreaming about the future. Their children were grown and settled. Their grandchildren were thriving. The ranch was prosperous and would continue to be so for generations. They had faced challenges and heartbreaks and triumphs together, and they had emerged stronger for it. As the stars wheeled overhead in the vast Colorado sky, Zelda thought about the broken woman she had been all those years ago, standing in her doorway, watching her husband and sister drive away. She thought about the cowboy who had appeared in her life at exactly the right moment, offering help without judgment, kindness without expectation. She thought about how trust had grown slowly between them, building into love that had sustained them through 3 decades of life together. And she thought about what Parker had said all those years ago, words that had changed everything. He lost the better woman. Those words had given her the courage to believe in herself again, to risk her heart one more time, to build a new life from the ashes of the old. Those words had been a prophecy and a promise, and Parker had spent 30 years proving them true. Now, sitting beside him in the darkness with his hand warm in hers, Zelda knew beyond any doubt that she had found her place in the world. Not in spite of what had happened to her, but in some strange way because of it. The betrayal had broken her, but in the healing she had become something new, something stronger and truer and more fully herself than she had ever been before. "I love you," she whispered into the night. "Thank you for seeing me when I could not see myself." "I love you too," Parker replied, his voice rough with emotion. "Always have, always will. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Zelda Donovan." They stayed on the porch a while longer, wrapped in each other's arms, grateful beyond words for the life they had built together. The past was forgiven, the present was sweet, and the future stretched ahead full of promise. They had weathered every storm together and would continue to do so for whatever years remained to them. It was a good life, a beautiful life, the kind of life worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth cherishing every single day. And as the moon rose over the prairie, casting silver light across their land, Zelda smiled and leaned her head against Parker's shoulder, completely and utterly content. The Wild West had been tamed, the frontier had closed, but their love story continued, as vital and passionate and true as the day it began. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had chosen each other every day for 30 years, who would keep choosing each other for whatever time they had left. That was the real triumph, Zelda thought. Not surviving betrayal, not building a successful ranch, not raising good children, though all those things mattered. The real triumph was this: learning to trust again, learning to love again, learning that the end of one story could be the beginning of a better one. Parker had been right all those years ago. Thomas had lost the better woman, but in losing her, he had given her the chance to become the woman she was always meant to be. And for that, strange as it seemed, Zelda was grateful.